fall tomatoes. It's a little early, but we've started to bring, some of the fall tomatoes in. The first thing that we brought in, and some of you may have grown these in the spring and early summer, these are mighty tomatoes, and the mighty tomatoes are a grafted tomato. And what they've done is they've taken a very vigorous rootstock that is disease resistant, is known to be, a heavy yielder, and they've grafted it together with some of our favorite varieties of tomatoes. And some of them are heirloom tomatoes, some of them are other varieties that we just like to grow, but maybe they're not very disease resistant, or maybe they don't yield very heavily. So with mighty tomatoes, you're going to see a heavier yield and more disease resistance, and more resistance to insect problems. One thing about the mighty tomato that's important to note is most of the time when planting tomatoes, what we'll tell you, and unfortunately I don't have any other tomato plants to demonstrate with, but we will be getting some in the next couple of weeks. But on normal tomatoes, when you plant them, we tell you to remove some of the bottom leaves and bury the tomato deeply, and sometimes even at an angle. But with the mighty tomatoes, you definitely can't do that, and I'm going to have you do a close-up. This is the graft on the tomato, and it's very important that that does not get buried. So what you want to do is make sure to plant it just as you see it in the pot, and do not bury the graft. But the mighty tomatoes are fantastic, but they're only available in certain varieties. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll start to get our fall tomatoes in. And one thing to keep in mind is that you want to plant a tomato that will produce in a relatively short amount of time. So 80 to 90 days is just kind of borderline. Now, that said, we are pretty mild going into December, so I really think that you're pretty safe, but you may want to do either determinate variety, and if you don't know the difference, indeterminate tomatoes, they tend to be more viney and sprawling, and they have the capacity to produce, as long as weather permitting, they can, produce indefinitely. Whereas determinate tomatoes generally will produce a certain amount, and then that's it for the season. But we'll have some wonderful varieties, and if you come in, a lot of us here at the nursery, we're avid vegetable gardeners, and we have our favorites, and we all have our secrets on, how to grow the best tomatoes. So, we can help you once you come in and kind of narrow down varieties for you. When planting tomatoes, it's really important. There are two things that I think are key, and one is watering. When watering tomatoes, it's very important that you have consistent watering. And if that means that you water deeply and then go a day in between, then that's how you should always go about watering your tomatoes. So, they seem to get stressed out and have problems when, there's inconsistency in the watering. So watering, one day, 3 days in a row, and then going 2 and 3 days in between, it would be much better if you, watered on a consistent schedule and then skipped if we had heavy rain. And so, watering is very, very important. And another thing that's important is that you make sure that your tomatoes are getting magnesium and calcium. A lot of the problems we see with the formation of tomatoes, sometimes we'll see blossom end rot, where you have, perfect tomato with sort of a flat black end. And that's blossom end rot, and that's a calcium deficiency. So we highly recommend using dolomite when first planting your tomato, and that is very high in magnesium and calcium. There are some other fertilizers too that can ensure that you're getting, the proper amount of calcium to your plants. Epsom salt, putting those burying Epsom salt in the hole with your tomatoes. That's an old, farmer secret. Making sure that you have, an adequate nitrogen source. If you're planting your tomatoes in the ground, you need to make sure that the soil drains properly. You might want to add expanded shale, because expanded shale ensures that the soil will drain well. But then if we go into a drought situation, it'll also ensure that you're backed up and that there's adequate moisture in the soil. If you're planting in containers, vegetables in containers do fantastic, but you tend to need a little bit more nutrition, a little bit more fertilizer, because you're watering a little bit more. So keep that in mind. I always use some manure source that I work into the soil, and you can, let the soil sit for a few days before planting. Compost, a source of manure, but not a ton. You don't need, a lot of manure, because it's very high in nitrogen. But a good source of compost. And one of my favorite fertilizers, and this is just a little trick, at time of planting, I usually do a granulated fertilizer or use something like Microlife, which is an organic fertilizer. But you might want to do throughout the growing season and when your plants are setting flowers and fruit. One secret that I use is fish fertilizer. All plants love fish fertilizer. The Indians knew that when they planted their corn and buried their fish heads at the bottom of their plants. But fish fertilizer is like magic, and you'll see almost instantly your tomatoes respond, to fertilizing them with fish fertilizer. And then a lot of the better fertilizers actually have fish emulsion in it. One of our favorites is John's recipe, and it's almost primarily fish emulsion. It has some other good stuff in it too. But these are fertilizers that are water soluble, and you can hit your plants with it once a week during the growing season. And I highly recommend that, because we have to water more this time of year, and so you lose more nutrients. This is another one we really like. It's the Urban Farms Texas Tomato Food, and there's one specifically for vegetables and citrus. This one I highly recommend because it's very high in calcium, and this is a way to get the calcium to your tomato plants in a way that they can really benefit from it. So this is really just kind of the start of the fall tomato season, and so we'll be getting more varieties in the next couple of weeks, and we'd be more than happy to help you, with any questions you might have on your tomato gardening.